Call to order this Mayor Commission budget work session. It's 10 o'clock on Monday, August 26th, and we will get started. Ms. Johnson, do you want to tee this off?
Yes. Thank you, Mayor. Good morning, Mayor,
Morning.
Commissioners, staff, members of the public who are joining us. So for the record, Faye Johnson, City Administrator. This first presentation is an update on our negotiations with FOP and IAFF. And throughout the presentation, I will just refer to it as police and fire, but it's with the police unions. So just by way of an overview, what I'm going to present this morning, Mayor, again, is an update on the negotiations, and then just highlight the tentative collective bargaining agreements that have been reached. A full presentation on the two CBAs will be given to the board at the time that you see them for the board's consideration for ratification. And then just walk you through the next steps. And as always, we can take questions from the board in terms of the process, but I would ask that we not delve deep into all of the elements of the CBAs, because that full presentation is coming before you. So I just want to review here, if you put this in perspective to the July 29th work session that I had with the board, we really have two independent but interconnected processes that we go through when we're in negotiations. One is by way of our goal, we wanted to negotiate the two new CBAs by early August. I indicate that that goal was met, recognizing that it probably slipped by a week based on my definition of what is early August as compared to mid-August and late August. And then on the budget side, given that the two are interconnected, to finalize the proposed balanced budget for FY25 by mid-August. Interconnected in that your balanced budget has to include what you negotiate with FOP and IAFF, or police and fire. I walked through the two timelines back at July 29th, and the main point that I want to highlight here is that the processes don't start a month or a week before we do the presentation to the board. On the budget side, which is the top half of the timeline, it starts in January and goes through implementation in October 1. So it is a 7th-month process interconnected with negotiations. That process starts in February and goes through the same timeline. It is a 6-month process. Ideally, if all goes well, the two processes merge when we get to August, which is where we are today, and then they are on track to just follow one timeline. So moving on to updates. With police, we began the negotiations on February 14th, and we reached a tentative agreement on August 14th. I will remind you that on the police side, we have 3 different agreements that we are negotiating. We have reached agreement on 2 of the 3. So one is pending, is in pause, and will be picked up back or in November when we get past adoption of the budget. I want to recognize the city's negotiation team. It includes just a number of operations. And when we start out with the non-financials, it's led by HR. When we shift in June to the financials, I lead those negotiations for obvious reasons. On the FOP side, they have a 5-member negotiation team that is at the table throughout the process. So by way of just some of the key provisions in the 2 agreements that have been negotiated, for the first tier of positions, a 17% market adjustment that will kick in on October 1st, the beginning of the fiscal year, and then the normal 5% that officers are given on their anniversary date. So that translates into a 22% compensation for FY25. For the civilians that are represented in FOP, a 15% market adjustment, and again, the standard 5% step pay, which translates into a 20% market adjustment. The tentative CBA includes a 3% COLA for both fiscal years 26 and 27. And when you look at that with the annual step pay, that is an 8% compensation increase for the last 2 years of the new CBA by way of market placement, because that's always what we look at in terms of how we're going to continue to increase our market placement to help with retention and recruitment. At this particular point, based on where all of the municipalities are in the Palm Beach County market, if these tentative agreements were to be ratified, it would put us in second place in the market, up from 15th place where we currently are. Bottom line, in terms of starting pay, it would raise it from the $63,000 currently to $73,710. And while we certainly are pleased to be able to raise our placement in the market, I want to just remind the board that market placement moves depending on how other municipalities negotiate their contracts. If you look at the current CBA, when we finished negotiations, we were in third place in the market, and then over the 3-year period slid to the 15th place. By having the 3% COLAs in year 2 and 3, we think that's going to help moderate how far we slide within the market over the course of the CBA. So moving on to fire. Negotiations there started February 21st. We reached tentative agreements on August 21st. Again, the same negotiation team on the city side, with the exception when you look at the fire leadership. And then for fire, their negotiation team is a 3-member team. So by way of highlights, the firefighters, market adjustment of 10.5%. They also get a 5% annual step increase on the anniversary date for a total compensation of 15.5%. For driver engineers, 10.2% market adjustment, 5% step brings it to total compensation, 15.2% for FY25. And then you see with the other categories of employees, a 5 and a 5 plus the 5% step, translating into a 10% compensation in fiscal year 25. We also included the 3% COLA in the second and third fiscal years, which will bring it again to 8% compensation. In terms of market placement within the Palm Beach County market, it would move us from 5th place in the market to 5th place in the market from 10th place where we currently are. Bottom line, it raises the starting pay for our firefighters from $57,012 to $62,998. And I just want to underscore here, I'm particularly proud and pleased that we were able to get our starting pay for firefighters at that threshold goal that the board was looking to achieve in the last CBA of 5th place. The last CBA, because of some reshuffling of the deck, the best that we did was 9th place in the market, and the North Star was at least 5th place in the market, and so that is achieved in this CBA if it were to be ratified. Next steps, we will, the FOP and IAFF. So we have the 2 CBAs on the police side that have been ratified on August 20th. Fire is currently in the ratification process. Their process differs from FOP in that they do it by mail, so they're going through that process now. We anticipate that those two CBAs will be ratified. We are teed up or are teeing up to bring the tentative agreements to the board for ratification consideration at your September 16th meeting. So I want to express appreciation to our team at the city on the management side, FOP's team on the negotiation side, as well as IAFF's team on the negotiation side, and to thank all of the various teams and staff for helping us to cross the finish line. And with that, Mayor, that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, and let me also publicly congratulate all parties concerned for getting these agreements wrapped up in the timely fashion. Ms. Johnson, can you speak to the COLA in both agreements? And correct me if I'm wrong, historically, we have never had COLA built into our public safety agreements. Is that correct?
Not completely.
Okay.
We had it at one point, and the date is going to slip me here, so I'll ask staff to help correct the record. We had it at one point. We've had it, and we've had it taken away. I believe the last time we had it was in 2009. Because of the economic crisis that happened back at that time. So one of the things that were negotiated because of financial constraints was that both unions gave up the 3% COLA. So this will be a CBA that we reinstitute COLAs. So you had it dropped in fiscal year 2009, and now it's being reinstituted. So it's been a long period where they have not had it, and part and parcel of why we have continued to just slide so far in the market.
Okay, thank you. Questions, comments, Commissioner Baduzzi, Commissioner Fox?
Thank you for the presentation. I know that you had mentioned that the marketplace ranking is dynamic, and we all know that because things are constantly changing. And I think that maybe adding those COLAs will certainly go somewhere to address, that issue and hopefully avoid the quick downward slide as soon as others. But these numbers, the 2 in the marketplace and 5 in the marketplace, those are based on fiscal year 2024, correct, for other cities?
I would say a combination, and I'll have Jose to come up. I think it's a combination of 2024 and what we know of FY25. Some municipalities have already negotiated for FY25. We may have 1 or 2 that are still in negotiations, and we don't yet know how much compensation that they will be given in FY25. But for the most part, by and large, it represents FY25 with maybe a couple of exceptions. Is that accurate?
Okay, so that's good, that if we're comparing the current state of things and that going forward, maybe that'll also avoid that slide. Thank you.
Yes, I don't expect that slide is going to drop as much as it did, in prior years.
Commissioner Fox?
Thank you so much. I know that there's so much work that has gone into this, obviously seeing the timeline of how many months you've been negotiating. I appreciate all the work that's going on to get to this point. But do you happen to know how many fire departments are in the county? I know that there are several municipalities that are working with Palm Beach County Fire. So do you happen to know?
I don't know, but I'm going to ask Chief Maddie if she knows how many.
13. Okay. So, when I'm looking, obviously I'm very happy that we could move our fire department to 5th place from 10th when there's only 13 that we're kind of competing with. But what do you think we would have to do to get into the top 3 for our fire department? I have several friends that are firefighters. I know many of them have side gigs because they can't afford to live on the salary that they're making here. And I think it's I'm glad that we have, there's a lot that you've gone into this for the next few years. I think the COLAs will help, but if we're going to be starting from 5th place, then rather than starting from 2nd place with the police, I understand every year that, the negotiations happen in other cities, but I would really like us to be in the top 3. I think we have the most danger in our city, the most accidents, the most calls, the tallest buildings, all the kind of issues that make it much more difficult to be a firefighter in this world. So I guess I'm just wondering if there's any flexibility. I assume that this was agreed to by IAFF, but I'm just curious, what would it take for us to get into the top 3? Thanks.
Well, I think the bottom line answer would be money. But it's much more complicated than just that. The union submit the proposal. They submit the proposal. And I have to put this into context. If you look at the CBA that was negotiated for the one that is now expiring, fire, we use a broader market region. I think we combine Palm Beach and Broward, so use that as our market. Our goal for that negotiation was a minimum of 5th place in the market. Based on the deal, the final deal we put on the table, we would have achieved that goal. The union wanted the flexibility of reshuffling the dollars based on a number of factors that they have to take into consideration. And that's not a matter that I can cross that line and dictate to them what all they have to consider. So they reshuffled the dollars that then slid them from the 5th place, based on our proposal, to the 9th place in the market. And then, of course, when other contracts were negotiated over the 3-year period, they slid even further. In general, fire does not have the challenge with starting pay that police has, because we have, I would say, an easier time, and it's comparatively, because it's tough with both operations, but we have had an easier time recruiting and retaining firefighters than we have on the police side. So giving them that flexibility, that's what happened when we were at the table in FY21. Now, for this particular CBA, we took a harder line on being able to reshuffle the deck, because I can't continue to have the city put in a position where, on the one hand, the union wants to have that full discretion and flexibility to reshuffle the deck, to take them from the 5th place proposal to 9th place, and then on the other hand, be hit across the head with, we're so far down in the market that it's hurting us. So we got to play ball with the same set of rules. If both teams are looking for a certain placement in the market, then I need both teams to be on the same page with what is the threshold goal. And so that was the hard line that was taken in this negotiation. So we reached the 5th placement in the market. Now, given that level set, if we were to look at then trying to increase our market placement from 5th place to the top 3, then that would then become just a matter of how much more funding we have available to put on the table. Again, that goes to a number of factors: how much general fund revenue we have coming in, how much expenses are, so we do that balancing act. And you're going to see when we get into the proposed budget presentation, our incoming expenses for FY25 exceeds the incoming revenue, so we had to do operating reductions. But there are a number of factors that impact that.
Thank you.
Commissioner Lambert.
Thank you. I have a follow-up on that, and then I have my original question. I just want to make sure I understand what you said in 2 parts. So the last thing that you said was, we did reduce our operating budget to be able to accommodate what we were negotiating.
Yes.
And I want to make sure I understand what you're saying about reshuffling the deck and playing by the same rules, is that and then also understanding what you said, the bottom line, the easy answer is when Commissioner Fox asked what would it take, you said money. And so to simplify what you were saying and make sure I understand, you're saying we offered or negotiated with a certain pot of money, and that instead of suggesting, and maybe not instead of, but that we're asking them, I want to make sure I understand this.
Let me see if I can articulate it better.
Okay.
Because if you're struggling to repeat what I told you, then I've not articulated it clear enough. In the first negotiation session, the current CBA, we allowed both unions the discretion to reshuffle the deck for market placement.
And I guess that's what I want to clarify. It just, when you say reshuffle the deck, you mean allow them to move the money into different pots. So when you were saying market placement based on annual pay versus, which you haven't said, maybe pension or another area that they might want to fund?
Just reshuffle the money in terms of how the salary, the market placement would be spread. So for example, when you look at the different categories under the fires negotiation, there's firefighters, lieutenants, and all of that. So, and I don't have what our proposed market adjustment was for this contract, but let's just say theoretically if it were 15%, and then it would have been a lower market adjustment for maybe the lieutenants. So there's a balance there between all of the categories. We allowed them that if they wanted to then do, let's say maybe a 10% market adjustment for starting, and then the 15% for a different category, we allowed them based on the same dollar amount. If you wanted to change the market placement or that was in our proposal, the city's proposal, you could. And that's what Fire did. So they reduced the amount of the market placement for starting firefighters from whatever that percentage was that would have put them in 5th place to a lower percentage, and it put them in 9th place. They spread the money differently than what administration put on the table. So it's not that you're just putting a certain dollar amount. It's based on the different categories that are in those particular CBAs.
Okay, and so if
And
I
so
could
for
clarify.
this CBA, I did not, we took a hard line, that for this CBA, the one that we're talking about now, that discretion to lower the market placement money that would take the starting pay to anything less than 5th position, we were not going to agree to that. So it had to be 5th position as the minimum threshold. Now, they had the discretion, and I would have agreed to that readily. If you want to take everything that we're putting on the table in terms of pay and dump it into starting salaries for firefighters, that was a go. But you can't take away what we're proposing for the starting pay and make the starting pay then fall into less than 5th position in the market.
Okay. No, I appreciate that extra explanation. That was helpful. And I guess that kind of goes to my original question as well, is because I know that on each slide for police and fire, you talk about starting pay and the increase that we saw there, but then also the step raises. And I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the difference between the two, because I understand that we do struggle across the city and, across the nation with recruitment of new employees, and especially for these roles if our counterparts are offering more money. And so I appreciate the starting pay attention that we're giving, but I also just want to make sure I understand what we're doing for retention of those that are at a higher level.
Well, on the retention side, based on the fact that when you were to go back, if you look at the other categories, there is market adjustment. So you look at firefighters, driver engineers, lieutenant and captains. So it's not as high as firefighters and driver engineers because that's the starting part of the scale. But there's a market adjustment built in for the other three categories, just at a lower percentage. So that helps with retention as well in those other categories. So that goes to retention as well.
And don't we do an analysis as to where those positions rank in the market as well?
Yes, we do one for all of them.
Yeah.
Yes. But the starting pay was where we were having the biggest challenge, and your starting positions are firefighters. And then with the step pay, that 5% step pay, they move every year in terms of the steps. And then that 5% comes with it, but market adjustment was needed if we were going to raise our pay and get us from that 10th place in the market up to 5th place. Did you have something you want to add? Come right on.
Jose Luis Rodriguez, Assistant City Administrator. One other important component of this to address the issue of take-home pay, which is the underlying issue, during the ratification process, when this item gets brought to the commission and we go into more detail in the contract, you are going to see that the only take-home pay changes that are made in both CBAs for police and fire are not just the market adjustments. There are incentives that they get that are additional money that they take home and all that was updated and reworked. So you'll see the full extent of how take-home pay was increased beyond just this market adjustment of the step plan.
When do we expect to get ratification by the unions? What's the timing on that?
Well, on police side, they've already gone through the ratification process. 2 of the agreements were ratified by that body. 1 of the agreements was not, and so we would resume the negotiation on that 3rd agreement in November. Fire is in the ratification process, and because theirs is by mail, do they have a deadline that they set?
Fire is, when we had a discussion with them, is trying to make the September 16th meeting, but they do have an issue of when they can schedule the counting of the ballots. So if they can't make the September 16th meeting, if they can't give us the ratification results with enough time for us to get it on the agenda, then it would be the meeting following that theirs would go, would be presented for the board and the mayor for consideration. But we are trying to meet those deadlines if we can.
Do we know what the percentage votes were in the ratification with the police contract?
I don't have that off the top of my head, Mayor, but we can send them. I think it was an overwhelming majority on with the 2 for police.
I was just curious. Okay.
Oh, Jose said he has it. Thank you.
If my memory serves me right, the lieutenants ratified their agreement by 100%. No one voted against it. And fire and rank and file and civilian FOP, I believe it was 98%. And I will confirm that, but I'm almost positive it was.
Great.
Yes. I'm hearing the thumbs up from HR. So yes,
Excellent.
98% and 100%.
Thank you. Commissioner Ward, President Ward.
Thank you for this, and I know it's been a long process. I appreciate it, and I tend to agree with Commissioner Fox, but I think that we should always be striving for the top 3, given how active both our fire and police are. But I also know that you've been working very hard to not only right our ship financially across the board, but make strides based upon what we couldn't do from years prior. And so I think it's a work in progress that I hope we continue to try to strive for and achieve, that we can always be in that top 3 for both our first responders, because it's important and they work very hard. And I think being in the city now, looking from the outside in, Chief Maddie, credit to you, because I feel like people don't realize what she's been working with, and then also the service that's already been provided, and that top-notch service that we always know that fire can achieve. And so it's a continual process to strive to be at the top placement. And I know there's other cities that have just continuously had us, beat by the numbers, but we can still kind of continue to work towards that goal. I'm curious, given that we've continued to increase, and this is more police, we've kind of been on fire for a while, but with police, and I work really closely with Chief Adderley, and I think he's been doing a great job. what are we doing to ensure after negotiations with the unions that our police and our fire are bringing us the best service possible, making sure that they are responding, making sure that they're doing, we're now going to hire top or, better candidates because we can offer more money. People do follow where the money goes. What are we doing on that side throughout the year to make sure that they're getting the best training possible, they're getting updated on information, the response times are key, their internal clocks are working when it comes to making sure that overtime is being abided by, all of these other things that go into creating an efficient operation?
Now, that would fall on the management side of the department, and certainly Chief Matty would take the lead on ensuring that all of those things are happening on fire side, and then Chief Adderley and his team on police side. So there are a number of ways that is done. Both operations have standing operating procedures that are put in place, and then based on the organizational structure within a department. So all of those different, if we start with the lowest work group, there is a hierarchy that would, one group would report to and would have oversight. Response time would be tracked just in general. So that really goes to how each department is being managed, and where there are problems, what, depending on the nature of the problem, what the appropriate action would be. So I can't speak factually in terms of how response time is measured and what have you. I would have to have Chief Matty and Chief Adderley speak to that. But I think we just had a presentation, when we had the presentation with on fire, that Chief Matty touched on response time, and certainly we can have Chief Adderley to do the same.
And I appreciate the question, Madam President. And suffice it to say that as we hear, we administration, me as mayor, hear of issues during the course of the year, we try to, we address those in real time. It's not as if we wait a whole year and make that part of contract negotiation. So we are constantly monitoring the performance of both of those departments, frankly, of all of our departments in our city. As we move forward, we certainly have high standards, and as we hear of issues, we certainly take steps to address those.
But I also want to add just a footnote to President Ward's comment about, it being a work in progress. And I certainly, have an appreciation for setting the bar higher, not shooting for 5th place in the market to 3rd place. And ideally, if money were not a factor, to achieve 1st place. But I would ask you all to continue to keep our history here in terms of managing the city's finances into context. When we looked at where we were in FY20, and then unfortunately on the onset of the pandemic, we had a financial situation that we had to do a level set, and I think you touched on that with your comment. So it is not conceivable when you historically have had an organization that has been challenged financially, and to then be able in one fell swoop to correct all of the financial challenges that you take on when you get in the saddle, whether it's me in the saddle, the mayor in the saddle, or you all in the saddle as commissioners. It is a financial impossibility for you to be able to correct historical gaps in managing the finances of an organization in one fell swoop. Now, some of the other ways of putting that is saying you can't turn a ship around on a dime. You can't eat an elephant at one time. So we have had to very strategically, very methodically be able to correct and turn that ship based on the constraints that we were dealing with in terms of the pot of money. Now, if the mayor and the commissioner were to say, we aren't going to do anything else in FY25, we're not going to finance anything else with general fund revenue but union contracts, I would tell you, as the city administrator, we probably would be able to put police first in the market as well as fire. But until that is done and said and give that direction given, I have to then look at how much on the operating side that I can reduce to still maintain the best practices that we have now achieved and trying to accomplish. And in the same vein, be able to put or try to meet the goals that the board has set in terms of making certain that we are higher in the market. So it's a balancing act. We always have those competing demands, and in now almost 39 years of being involved in budget, I have not yet had the luxury of seeing where there was more money than demands. And so that's the balancing act that we have to do. But certainly, if we want to set that bar higher, we want to look for a minimum of third place in the market, you know, that's what we would march toward when we look at getting at the negotiation table the next time around.
Commissioner Baduzzi.
So speaking of placement in the market, I want to make sure that I understand how these numbers are actually working. Now, number 2 for our law enforcement, for police, that's based upon the number of municipalities that have private security, not even necessarily municipalities, but private police, not private police.
They have their own police
They have their own
department.
police departments.
Yes.
That's what I meant
Yes.
to say. So you utilize Palm Beach County as the group for that.
Yes, we include the sheriffs, yes.
Sheriff's Office, and school district and everyone, I assume, or just maybe not?
Oh, no, I don't think we include the school district. We do? Yes, I stand corrected. We include the school district as well.
Perfect. Now, how about for fire and achieving that 5%? You had mentioned Broward County as well. So is it a larger group than just those 13 local fire departments?
The last negotiations, we had a broader regional market that picked up Palm Beach and market. For this CBA, we just restricted it to the Palm Beach County market.
That changes things, obviously, because I would assume that Broward County has a number of independent fire departments, as well as Broward County Sheriff's Office being the main fire provider. And being number 5 in a much smaller market, I'm not so sure that's as great of an achievement as had we had both markets being considered. Can someone address that? And why did we narrow it down to just Palm Beach County for the market instead of including those in Broward?
Well, as part of the negotiations, the union and the city had discussions as to what is an accurate and representative market that we want to benchmark. So that wasn't a unilateral decision by the city. It was in consultation with the union during negotiations. Both parties agreed, you know, the representative sample that we think is accurate and good for these negotiations is the Palm Beach County market. So that's why it changed from the last time.
Thank you.
And in addition to that, you know, from a practical matter, when one of the major challenges, and not that you do it for, you know, ease of negotiations, but when we were at the table of the last CBA, trying to then track, you know, the musical chairs in Palm Beach County is one challenge. And as you expand that regional market, now trying to track the changes or the musical chairs in Broward, you know, with 39, I think Broward may now be at 41 municipalities. Trying to then track how all of the agreements are moving and wrapping all of that up in the 2-month window between June 1st and August. I mean, it's a real challenge here. So again, collaboratively, that decision was made that really the primary market is Palm Beach County. And so we were able to then focus on how we can negotiate a much higher market placement within Palm Beach County as the market or the region.
Any other questions on this portion of the agenda? Again, Ms. Johnson, to you and your team, congratulations for reaching this milestone, and it's not even September yet, which is significant. I have, maybe some of you were here, when I was a commissioner, there have been times when we've had union negotiations, and we were right up to the deadline well into September before we got those resolved, which obviously affected how we could balance the budget, et cetera. So to be at this point, at this juncture in the fiscal year is fantastic. Thank you again.
Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, item 2, proposed fiscal year 25 balanced general fund budget. Ms. Johnson.
Okay, thank you. Again, Faye Johnson, City Administrator, for the record.
You don't need to go out and come in.
No, Mayor, I can tell you, I probably was the only one had appreciation for that levity, so I'm not going to do that again.
Thank you.
I have dispensed with that completely. I think it was probably shell shock to everyone seeing that. It won't happen again.
Okay, just asking.
Thank you very much. So moving right along, this presentation is on the proposed general fund balance budget. It differs differs slightly in terms of the context that I presented it on July 29th. I presented that in the context of a draft budget because we were still very early on in negotiations, but given where we are, I am presenting to you the FY25 proposed general fund balance budget. So just by way of what we're going to hear, go over the threshold goals, the summary of our FY25 revenues and expenditures, the operating reductions that occurred to balance the budget, and then just some budget highlights and always next steps. So again, the threshold goals didn't change. I indicated that we had 2 interconnected processes. We are now at mid-August, maybe late August by some definition, but we have certainly met that goal to have a finalized proposed balanced budget for discussion this morning. Again, we have reviewed the timeline of the 2 processes, the budget process being at the top of the chart. So just by way of a quick overview, there are various sources of general fund revenue. While we tend to focus on property taxes because that's the lion's share of our general fund revenue, certainly there are other sources of revenue that goes into the general fund. And by property taxes, I mentioned it's the lion's share. It represents about 60% of the general fund revenue. And again, this presentation is putting it into context from the July 29th presentation without going back through that entire presentation. So at the July 29th work session, what was presented was the general fund, the property tax revenue of the $12.6 million. That hasn't changed. All other sources was $8 million. At July 29th, we had $20.6 million in general fund revenue. Since July 29th, we have gotten the final figures from the state on the state shared revenue, and that revenue came in $465,000 higher than what we initially projected. So the state shared revenue back in July 29th was part of that $8 million from all other sources. We got an additional $465,000 based on the numbers that the state gave us. So by way of an update, our general fund revenue for FY25 is now $21 million. So you can see just how it increased between July 29th and now. So when we look at the expenditures by categories, the personnel $21.3 million is always the lion's share of the budget of about 81%. Material and services, computer replacement program, and then the two other categories, which makes up the $26.2 million. Now, on the expenditure side, there have been no changes between July 29th and what is being presented to you today. The change occurred on the revenue side of the $465,000 in additional revenue, which is a good thing. So when we look at comparatively, our total expenses remain projected for FY25 at the $26.2 million. The revenue that was presented on July 29th was the 20.6. So we had a gap of 5.6 million, which was going to have to be closed by operating reductions. When you add in now the 465,000 from state shared revenue, it brought that gap down to 5.2 million because we had that additional 465 million. So July 29th, we had a $5.6 million gap that was going to be filled from one-time funding, and I'll go through that. Now we have a $5.2 million reduction or gap that will still be filled from operating reductions. So when we look at the operating reductions now of the 5.2 million, our reductions, operating reductions now when we updated the numbers is 4.6 million. So the operating reductions that made up the 5.6 million, it was reducing the operating budget by from those various line items, taking $3 million from vehicle replacement, taking $1 million from the police CBA funding, taking $1.2 million from contingency, and taking $420,000 from road paving. Given that we had the additional $465,000, and once finance went through the truing up of the budget and reconciling the projections with the actuals, so tightening up the numbers, we were able to, between the two, it was about $1 million in operating funding. So what I am proposing is that we put that $1 million in the operating side for the police CBA vehicle funding, and we no longer have to reduce one-time funding to add one-time funding money of $1 million. So that frees up $1 million on the one-time funding side. And I know that's a mouthful. So if we look at the one-time funding, we had the $31 million for talking purposes. What was presented on July 29th was $4.7 million for police. Now that we have the $1 million in operating, I don't need to propose $1 million of one-time funding for the vehicles on the police side. And what I am proposing and presenting to you this morning is that that $1 million that is no longer needed for police be allocated to the general government, which by category, it was property restoration and grant match. So Mayor, I want to pause right here so that I make certain that this is clear before I move on, because we balance the budget in terms of being able to meet the best practices that we put in place with the level of funding. We always, not always, since we started with the best practice of budgeting for the police CBA vehicles, that was $2.1 million. And that initially was proposed to be reduced on the operating side to $1.1 million, but pick it up, that $1 million from one-time funding. I know we no longer need to do that with police vehicles because we have now identified $1 million on the operating side. So that leaves that item fully funded on the operating side. With the $1 million that it frees up with the one-time funding, I'm proposing that that 1 million be shifted to property restoration and grants. So I want
All right.
to make certain that that's clear.
Anyone have any questions on that? Commissioner Warren?
I do. On slide 9, where you show the reduction in, is that, yes, in road paving, can you explain how we came to that?
Yes. In road paving, when we set the best practice in place to be able to fully fund the annual road paving budget, the primary source of funding for road paving is gas tax. And Kevin was typically in a situation where with just that one source of funds, it did not fully fund that program. And so that had been the practice, that with whatever funding that we could get from gas tax for road paving, that was it. Because the general fund historically did not put money into road paving. About 2 years ago, we started complementing the gas tax funding for road paving with some general fund dollars in the operating budget to establish a best practice. If you got a program in place and it calls for 3.7 million, you should fully fund it. It's just a matter of which pot of money. We initially started out funding it for $1 million. That was the general fund commitment. In this year's budget, we increased it by $4 million. So we funded it this year for $1.4 million. What we are recommending in FY25 as part of the reductions on the operating side to close the 5.2 million is that we scale it back now to $1 million and reduce it by that 420,000. But it still would have the program fully funded for FY25.
So we've reached the goals that were set originally in order to pave the roads and ensure that they did not have the damage that we'd seen historically, and the plan is in place and it's ongoing, and now that it's already been stabilized, we've identified that this is an area where we can reduce.
Yes, we're reducing it back to the $1 million commitment. We had actually exceeded that commitment for this year by 420,000. So we're just scaling it back to $1 million. But the FY25 road paving program is still going to be fully funded.
Thank you.
Any other questions on this particular portion? Okay, you may proceed, Ms. Johnson.
Thank you. So we've gone through that. I'm going to move right on to slide 11. So with the additional 465,000, look at how the budget increased from FY25 draft budget, which was presented July 29th. So we now have a proposed FY25 general fund balance budget of $264,019,397. Again, that difference between the 263 plus presented on July 29th is the 465,000. The truing up was always part of that 263. It has now just been allocated differently than what it was when it was presented July 29th. Again, a balanced budget of $264,019,397. So just by way of highlights, the proposed budget maintains all of the core services and programs in the various categories of public safety, quality of life, internal governance. It continues budgeting best practices with the vehicle replacement program, the road paving program, the police CBA vehicles, and contingency. And I do want to just add a footnote on contingency. In the July 29th work session, when we were talking about contingency, I think there was a question or some in part of the discussion about contingency. In my response, I indicated that we did not set a dollar threshold for contingency. And that is accurate in terms of discussions with the board, but in looking back through the various policies, finance reminded me that in one of the policies, it did establish, a threshold for what we should budget for contingency, and that was 1% of revenue. So that best practice was put in place, and when we look back at the data, by and large, it had been met. So it will just continue with that best practice, and I just want to highlight that to the board so that it's not misconstrued that there was not anything in place as it relates to contingency funding. Moving right on to highlights. For the FY25 budget, it would establish a new budgeting best practice with the computer replacement program, a 5-year program similar to vehicle replacement, funded at $1 million a year. That would enable us to continue to replace our computer equipment as it becomes outdated. And we know that the data changes rapidly, the hardware changes as well, and we want to stay on top of that. Moving right on, the FY25 budget includes the various personnel compensation requirements, with now the addition of including the CBA costs for fire and police. With the one exception for police, it includes a placement amount so that we can pick back up negotiations in November. Various programs and initiatives. We have funding in the budget for the winter series of The Soul in the City. The South End Camera Initiative funding is in there. Ongoing police back expansion unit, the Western Community Street Illumination Program, our elementary grant program, the Jump Start Academy. The community engagement and homeless assistance funding is in the budget, as well as funding for community paramedics, our illegal dumping program, which is just continuing to result in very great outcomes, as well as our marketing initiative. So next steps.
Hold on, Ms. Johnson.
Yes.
President Ward has a question.
Are we going to get a description of these programs in more detail, or would I follow up with you on that?
Yes, we can provide descriptions of the programs. I mean, typically, we can provide descriptions. We don't necessarily do, just as part of the budget process, write out descriptions for a program, but each program has a description of what it is, and so we can compile
Are there
that
any particular
information.
you want to follow up on?
South End Camera Initiative, what the cost of that is, the ongoing police bike expansion unit, what's the cost of that? Where are those bikes going? I mean, obviously, I'm excited about the continuation of the elementary grant program.
Can you perhaps just send an email to city administrator with the detailed programs when we get back to you?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and at the July 29th work session, we did go through some of the funding for the various initiatives. I was remiss in including it on this one, but certainly we will get you that information and follow up to the email.
Commissioner Fox?
Thank you so much. I think all of us were CC'd on an email last week from Jennifer Ferriel regarding the budget from the DDA in terms of homeless outreach assistance that is normally provided by and voted on, I guess, by their board, that they were decreasing funding this year. And so I'm wondering if that is something we need to look for in our general budget. I don't know. I haven't heard anything other than the first email we were CC'd on, but I just want to make sure that we are providing the resources needed if she's not able to work something out with the DDA.
I'm going to have the mayor correct me if I'm misconstruing it, because I've read so many emails, but I believe in the last email that I saw from their DDA's executive director, the board had approved that $150,000 that was at issue.
Yeah, they put it back in.
Okay, thank you.
President Ward.
I just have, looking at this, even just the Western Community Street Elimination Program, I know I've gone over the prior study I've mentioned it to you, I've gone over it with other departments. Before my time, there was targeted illumination programs, and I don't know that we finished with them. And so I'm curious, we're going into Western Community Street Illumination Program. I get that there were dark areas there, but top 10, we haven't accomplished yet. So are we still going to focus on those before we get to the western communities? Because a lot of those dark areas are in the north end.
Okay, two separate things, and Kevin, feel free if I don't articulate this accurately. The Western Community Street Illumination Program is separate and apart from the street lighting program that we have, although street lighting is illumination, certainly. The Western Community Street Illumination Program is an initiative that was negotiated between the city and the Western communities some years ago in terms of maybe issues that they raise in their communities about responsibilities that the city normally would have been picking up that they were doing. And through that discussion, one of the primary issues that those communities were facing at that time had to do with street illumination. So an agreement was reached that on an annual basis, the city would fund this initiative at $300,000. Okay, so we have continued to honor that because that was an agreement that was worked out between the city and the Western communities. Street lighting funding has been in the budget under the surtax money. When the city got its portion of surtax funding, think about 1.2 million or 2.1 million was allocated for that, and that's how that program had been funded. And then they went through that whole study, and you shared the copy with me, and it has certain criteria on how that the decisions of which neighborhoods would get street lighting. Now, admittedly, there is some fine tuning that needs to be done with that criteria. Kevin and his team are working on that. We have been notified by the county that under the surtax program, the city is scheduled to get an additional, now I think the number is about $22 million. It started out when the county recognized that the interpretation of the cutoff of the money, they clarified that. So of that 22 million, initially they thought it was going to be 14 million. They have now fine-tuned it. So 22 million is what we are poised to get. Out of that 22 million, Kevin and his team are looking at how they're going to recommend the funding for that additional 22 million. I know street lighting is built in that. We have a committee that those recommendations go through, and then ultimately it will come to the board. So we're looking at street lighting from the aspect of how we can bring additional money now that we have that 22 million, and then what needs to be maybe refined on the criteria so that it operates more in line with what we do for the road paving index. Now, we're not going to go back through that whole process that we went through for road paving, but we're going to look at the criteria in the street lighting study to see how can we tweak it so that we have more of an objective study or criteria, rather, on how neighborhoods are ranked for street lightings. So that's where we are on that.
Thank you.
But for clarification, the Western Community Street Illumination Program referenced here is totally separate and apart from the street lighting program that Kevin has been working on.
It is,
Okay.
yes. and we're honoring that commitment. It's at $300,000 annually, and so we'll continue to honor that because that was an agreement that was struck some time back.
Commissioner Lambert.
Thank you. Can you generally just tell us about the decision-making process on how this list was created?
These are just highlights that I pulled out. This is not a created list. The budget includes hundreds of programs and initiatives. I just highlighted some that tend to be very popular, that tend to be on everyone's radar, and highlighted that they are in the budget. So there is no process or criteria where we just kind of do a comprehensive list of programs and decide what we're going to fund. I just pulled these out. The budget just includes, a number, probably hundreds of different programs and initiatives. These are ones that I just highlighted that are in the budget.
And I think it's probably, it should be noted that you may recall the timeline that was presented much earlier, where the budget process begins as early as January of each year. And each department is to put together their particular budget. And so there's tweaking, there's fine tuning, et cetera, but that's part of the process. And then the 24 million or whatever this proposed budget is, as Ms. Johnson said, she just pulled out some programs that were in those various departments that ultimately got approved and inserted in the final budget. Is that a correct?
That is correct, Mayor. And to your statement and to mine, so when you look at just the highlights, the first thing is that it maintains the core services and programs. So if I were to go through the public safety operations and then, break down all of the program and services, that's going to be a cadre of different programs and services. If I were to do it for quality of life, Parks and Rec has just a myriad of programs and services that we provide to the public. The ones that are on this slide are just ones that I highlighted because they tend to be very popular. Well, all of them are popular, but they tend to be top of mind for residents, and I think maybe top of mind for our elected officials as well. But there is no ranking or criteria by which those particular programs go through. Those are priorities or initiatives that have been set by this body, at one point in time through the budget process, and they were simply me pulling them out and highlighting that they are in this budget. So, for example, I highlighted the Soul in the City so that the mayor would not say to me, Ms. Johnson, is that Soul in the City funded? Because I want that program to stay in place. Mayor, did I accurately describe what you would say?
No.
Okay.
Nor your interpretation of my voice was inaccurate as well.
That was spot on,
but I am very interested in the Soul in the City program. Yes, Ms. Johnson. Any other questions on this before she continues? Okay, you may proceed. Oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner Warren.
I just want to say, I think that some other things are like where we're supporting the elementary schools and a lot of other things that are included but not necessarily listed here in the highlights, correct?
Well, the elementary grant program, yeah, that's where we're supporting.
I see
yes.
it. I didn't see it. Okay, I'm very happy to see that we are doing the computer replacement program. And I think that that's probably something that we've been able to arrive to based off of some of the successes that we've seen with some of the other progress that we've made, like the vehicle replacement and all of those other things. So I think we're moving in the right direction. Thank you.
I'm glad you highlighted that, Commissioner Warren, because I think it demonstrates what we have been trying to do under my administration, which is, she characterized it as best practices. We have been looking for ways to incorporate best practices. Again, I hate to go back to when I was a commissioner in let's say, not the good old days, but there was many times, there was an effort, whether it's to get replacement vehicles, we had a dire need for a compute. We weren't budgeting for inevitable expenses. It was always trying to it was a crisis situation when the police department needed more vehicles or the fire department needed vehicles replaced because we had not been exercising what Ms. Johnson says best budgeting practices. And so I'm very happy that under Ms. Johnson's leadership as a city administrator, we have been incorporating more of those best practices into the budget process. So it makes a much more smoother approach, whether it's replacing vehicles, replacing computers, and other types of things. And so she continues to recommend to me as the mayor and to incorporate in the budgeting process, how can we get even better and employ more best practices going forward, so there is not that crisis element when expenses do arise. So kudos to you, Ms. Johnson.
Thank you, Mayor. Can I proceed?
Yes, you may, Ms. Johnson.
Okay, so wrapping up, in terms of the timeline, we have the two budget adoption hearings. The first one will be September 9th, and then on September 16th at the regular board meeting, we know that we're going to be able to bring forward the two contracts from FOP for ratification, and hopefully that will be the case with fire, depending on how their ratification process goes. If not, then as Mr. Rodriguez mentioned, we will bring that ratification for the board's consideration at the other September meeting. September 25th would be the final budget adoption hearing, budget and millage rate adoption hearing. And then October 1 is the start of fiscal year 25. Everything takes effect on in the budget, as well as with the two new CBAs. And with that, Mayor, that concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to take additional questions from the board.
Thank you. Any other questions, Commissioner Lambert?
Thank you. I have a comment and then a question, and I just want to echo the mayor's comments. And I think that the best practices that we're putting in place, you know, to say another way, is allowing us to think ahead and to plan ahead and to not be scrambling. And I'm extremely appreciative of it, because I do remember some of those budget meetings years ago where we were scrambling to find money to replace vehicles and such. So thank you for that. I just had a question about this timeline. Because I know that I will be out of the country on September 16th, and I think Commissioner Warren will be as well. We're going on a community leaders trip to Israel, and I just want to make sure, does the ratification of those union contracts require a supermajority or a simple majority?
I believe it's a simple majority.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that we were able to carry on business. Thank you so much.
And thank you for your comments.
Congratulations to both of you for going on that trip.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments on these items? Thank you again, Ms. Johnson, and to your team for a very detailed presentation. I think both of them represent good news at this stage of the fiscal year. I don't have anything under mayor's matters. Commissioners, do you have anything for the good of the order? Yes,
Just
Commissioner.
a question, and I don't know if anybody else has received this, but over the weekend, I received some calls that some folks were trying to get the agenda off of our new and improved website for tomorrow's historic preservation meeting. And I went and tried to find it myself and had difficulty, but I don't know if there's somewhere else that we need to be looking. And just if maybe I could talk to communications afterwards or find out where those are located, but it was difficult to find.
All right, and then, send me an email. I'll make a note, but send me an email to make sure I forget. We'll figure out how to get that information tracked down.
Thank you.
To locate it.
And Mayor, before we adjourn, I forgot to thank the staff, and I want to make certain that, you know, we don't leave here without me thanking all of our departments. You know, finance plays the lead role. They're the main characters here when we start putting this budget together, but a budget is developed with all departments, you know, having a hand or a role in it. And so I don't want to be remiss to not thank, you know, the various departments and divisions that play a hand in developing a balanced budget. So, Ms. Souffrant, thank you to your team and all of the other departments.
Thank you all. And this meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you.